Select Board to order.
Don Davenport.
Eric Henry, and we have Ryan Domina, our town administrator as well.
The Wilbraham Select Board.
I'd like to call the Wilbraham Select Board to order and recognize the present are all three members of the board, as well as the town administrator, Nick Burrow.
Thank you. Hamden Advisory.
Thank you. We are present, we have a quorum, and we are already in order. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do not believe there's a quorum for the Wilbraham Finance Committee.
Nope.
But thank you for being here. Okay, so we will do the Pledge of Allegiance for those of us here.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so we are going to begin. Thank you again, everyone, for being here tonight and being able to accommodate us in your schedules. So we are going to take a site visit out to the bleachers.
The only thing I have to add to that is if anyone has shoes that aren't fit for walking or would just like more assistance, we do have 2 golf carts parked at the end of the next hallway. We have the direct in into that.
Here's the game going. The lights are on. Oh, okay.
But you sat in these places once or twice, didn't you?
Yes, I have.
Did you play anything in high school?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? I know that hooky wasn't.
Yeah, I did a lot of that. Which way we heading? Out this way?
If people want to take the carts to go that way, we have this way.
I'll meet you up in our corner.
I was happy with that.
Yeah, that's the thing. What I said, he was supposed to.
I was just going to stay here too because I was going to stay here too. Yes, I don't think we're taking any notes. They're just going to show them. Just a site visit. There's a lot of people. I want to look at my. I want to go through my. I have to click on a link that we're watching a video. I just want to make sure I have all that, so I want to stay in.
But there's something about it that you're saying that you're going to send them to
I did. I sent him some stills. Yes, I shared the slides with the pictures of the bleachers.
Okay, perfect.
So he's going to do that, which is so nice.
Yeah.
He'll put those in the film when he's editing their film. He'll put the stills from the presentation. So yeah. Yeah, when I texted, I totally looked at the time. I said, oh my gosh, Anthony, do you want me to come and grab the camera? He goes, oh, I forgot to tell you, Steve offered again, and just remember to give me those slides. So I just did it right then.
He's so nice. I mean, the fact that you used the term that I offered, I mean, I was asked and I accepted. If you didn't call me, I don't know if I would have
Gone chasing him, right?
But, yeah, well, there's several members of the public access there. Down one reason for not feeling well.
Oh, really?
So usually it's okay. I'm not the first person on the.
Usually Bob, we have Bob.
Bob, yeah.
Yeah, Bob Torville, so yeah, so thank you.
Very well. I mean, it's so good, as I said the other night, you do a concert in South Park, and you kind of have to think in one way in terms of
Getting all that.
who's in the solo now, and make sure you're.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. This was a lot too, but it's kind of more organized. It's organized. The musical concerts are a little bit of chaos to film. This is organized chaos.
Organized. Thank you.
That's the kind of. Yeah.
That's chaos we like.
Yeah, that's hitting it on the head.
That's what we're.
Oh, my.
Well, I was saying that
close the door, make sure you get back.
Okay.
Good evening, Minichog families of students that ride bus 21. The bus company has informed us that due to a staffing issue, Minichog bus 21 will run 10 to 15 minutes late, picking up students tomorrow morning, Friday, October 10th. That's Minichog's bus 21 will be 10 to 15 minutes late tomorrow morning. We are so sorry for this transportation delay. Thank you and have a good night.
graders, and we do interviews with the superintendent. We've done interviews with police officers about bullying.
There we can set the students come in with great ideas and work together as a team.
Meeting with some new friends, some old friends, and seeing people that I don't see every day.
And Tuesday morning, they have a special guest on the show, 22 News reporter and WMS alum, Julia O'Keefe.
They had nothing like this here when I was in middle school, so to get kids interested in journalism really.
No.
Sean drove one of the carts back. I almost died. He said, I love walking, but how long do you get to drive a car? So fun. That was quick, that was bad. Yeah, it was quick. Chili Willy.
Johnny, you want to go to the bleachers?
They're all coming back.
Oh, they are?
Yes.
His advisory. Okay, and the guy that with her that has the mustache.
What was your reply when the kids told you that they felt it was dangerous? Can you please tell them the kids? Hey, how you doing? Doing all right. Hey, what's the Wi-Fi password at the middle school? Too soon.
Your first Falcons game?
Maybe. But I can run out there.
Just didn't want something.
Mary, you must agree.
You're all past that.
We've had our exercise.
I know, I'm going to text them and tell them that.
I know.
Okay, so we are going to continue with new business, the FY27 budget process and discussion.
Actually, Michelle, before we go on, I just want to bring up one point. So we asked some students, I don't know how many of you heard what was happening, what they thought of the bleachers and the safety of the bleachers. And one student was like, I fell through a board. And he came over and he addressed us. And then Heather and John, what was your comment that you guys told the students when they said they didn't feel safe or they didn't feel the bleachers were safe? What was your comment?
Don't go up there. Don't go up there. You don't feel safe. So the,
Well, my other
you
comment
open
was
the,
that it's structurally sound.
it is,
The boards are the issue.
yeah. So you opened up the can of worms.
Don't go up there.
Yep.
If you don't feel safe, don't do
I am
it.
going to ask everybody that does speak if you could speak into the microphone and just press the button and make sure the green light is on, just so everybody can hear. Thank you.
The other comment that we made was that the bleachers are structurally sound and that the wood needs to be replaced. There's no question about that.
Well, the students were questioning it. They're saying the thing sways, it moves, and they said they really
Well,
freaks them out.
The
That's what
town
they were talking
inspector
about.
said it was structurally sound.
To add to that, if you may, we actually asked the building inspector to go over and take a look, because
Okay.
we had a member from the school committee come to one of the select board meetings in Wilbraham, and tell us that they were being held together by bubble gum and that they were unsafe. So we felt it was important to get the building inspector over here. So on July 31st, the building inspector, John Walsh, went over there. And it's a very brief report he provides. Well, actually, he did it on July 30th. It was accompanied by Sam Boyd and Dave Rogers. Quote, structurally, they are very safe. I did not observe any conditions that would pose an immediate hazard. At the time of inspection, I did not observe any indication that the bleachers were being held together with quote-unquote bubble gum. That said, I would recommend some basic maintenance going forward. Scrape and paint the steel framing to prevent rust and preserve longevity. Replace any damaged and worn boards as needed. Continue to cover the seating areas, ideally with a vinyl type material to protect the surface and improve comfort.
Thank you.
You asked a question about safety, and I'm not qualified to tell you whether it's safe or not. So I'm proposing right now is that you come up with 3 engineered solutions to this problem that you say you are having. I haven't seen any of that, okay? So 3 different engineered solutions as to what you want to do. And then we can decide from there. But just to say that you need new bleachers on the recommendation of a student, that the boards were staged, it looked like to me, on the ground, I'm sorry, I'm not going for it.
Okay, so why would we need 3? I mean, I understand we need 3 when we go to bid. We have to put it out for bid for 3. But is there a reason why you're asking for 3 separate engineered solutions?
Absolutely, because you'll have 3 different points of view, hopefully. The more points of view you have, the better the answer that you can come up with for a solution.
Why don't we come up with 4?
Do 5.
You know what? So is there a cost that you want to incur?
Point of order, Madam Chair. It seems like we're willing to take the agenda out of order. Can I just suggest that we do that for purposes of public acknowledgement that we're out of order on the agenda?
Madam Chair, you're really not out of order because we have till 7:05. We talked about the site visit, and you're still within the 5 minutes. So you're not out of order.
John, do we have any idea what the current bleachers are worth financially, right? Once we invest a certain amount of money in renovation and rehab, then they would be required, wouldn't they be required to meet current code? And personally for me, my biggest problem with bleachers is that they're not up to current code, which I know by law, they are not required to be. Until we spend a certain amount of money renovating them, then they will be. And then obviously it's diminishing returns, right? That they would have to be replaced rather than all the money that would have to be. The only way to make them up to code would be to replace them, I imagine. But I think you have a little information on that, John.
Sure. So, yes, we did a search to try to get a current valuation of the bleachers. We called the assessor from Wilbraham and was told that it's not an assessed value for those bleachers. We looked at our insurance policy. The insurance policy also does not have an assessed value for the bleachers. You know, we were told by a vendor in the industry that the true value of those bleachers is the scrap metal value, which would depend on how much it actually weighs when you take the boards off and get down to just the metal. So it would very easily meet that threshold in order to trigger ADA compliance in our view.
Just a question there. I thought those regs were in effect around renovations to a building. I haven't had any personal understanding that it would impact any facility or something other. It's come up certainly with regard to school buildings and the like. This is the new issue that I've heard.
Yes, my understanding is that ADA compliance is sort of any facility or structure. So if, obviously in the circumstance of a building or renovating a building, that would be true. But our understanding is that that's also true for any other sort of facility that we operate. So if we were to work on the snack shack or those kind of things, that would also be true with renovations to those as well. So it's not necessarily having to be an habitable space.
And why did we need to upgrade them when we built the building?
You want to know why they didn't upgrade the facility when they did the building? Steve?
If I might, of course.
Sure, I can just tell you.
As somebody who was involved in
Thank you.
building of this high school, the bleachers were involved in the discussions to the extent of whether or not we should replace them or not as part of the project. That was the extent of the involvement, and the determination was made for financial reasons to not touch the bleachers. There was no discussion about whether or not there was any ADA implications to the bleacher structure.
Yes, and I would add to that that the leadership at the time and the building committee at that time, which had representatives from Hamden and Wilbraham, wanted to put together a project that they felt the community would support and not a project that would exceed expectations and costs, such as air conditioning the entire building, the athletic facility around the football field. Those were things that were not put into the project because they wanted the project to have a chance to be approved by both towns and to keep the cost as reasonable as possible. That was my recollection.
So I would share just from my experience, for the record, previously in another role, part of that was an ADA compliance for the town I worked in. I can't speak specifically to Dr. Terbass's point on what would trigger an upgrade requirement, but I can say that the ADA codes do apply to the programmatic access, which would include the bleachers. I just can't speak to whether there's a triggering cause to that effect. And certainly there are things that can be done, such as the side access, to comply. I think it just becomes to what degree is that compliant and is that effective enough under the code review.
My major concern about the bleachers is that pre-existing non-conforming, they're not up to code. They may be structurally sound. That doesn't make them safe. Those gaps are dangerous. I have come to an age where I appreciate a sturdy handrail. There are no handrails there, just the either end of the middle, you're going up there, rickety racket. And if you're talking about expenses, if something should happen and someone come after us for some catastrophic accident due to the fact that these are not up to code, I wonder what our liability would be there. And would it be much more expensive? Could it be much more expensive than actually dealing with the problems?
If I could just, in a different segue around this same subject though, one of my concerns is the most recent capital plan we have for Wilbraham involving the schools was from last budget season. And if we use that for this FY27 season, the school's capital request total $10.9 million for Wilbraham. To take the bleachers in isolation is irresponsible for the taxpayer. If we want to talk about the entire budget and the entire capital plan and get capital in the room, then I think we'll get on a meaningful discussion around it. But just to take the bleachers and not talk about the graphic computers you need or the switches you need that are in the plan, it's irresponsible.
So just speaking for Doug and myself, I think the intention of the agenda, if you look at it, is to notify the towns of several capital items that are coming up, and so that we can have a planful discussion about how we want to approach those. It's not an immediate capital request. Many of the things, I agree, are on the capital plan for this year because of deferred capital from prior years. And we got to figure out a way to get out of that. You know, if we just keep kicking things down the road, the number gets bigger and bigger every year until it becomes insurmountable. And so part of the hope that Doug and I have of this conversation is, can we start thinking about, so what will be the plan? So that's why you'll see there are a number of items that address capital. Not that tonight's a capital meeting, but can we start putting our heads together?
And I welcome that discussion.
One quick thing, just back to Mike's point before we get back on the schedule. I really thought This meeting was more, we were going to be in the 30,000-foot view of the timeline of how we're, and not to throw, so, not get into what we got into last year, which is, seemed like a lot of 11th hour thing. We have a great representation of everybody who has a seat at the table tonight in October. So without getting into how many bolts we need for, row 3, how are we going to go forward, making sure that everybody has the information in a timely manner so that we can present it to our respective towns and our respective voters. And keep it at kind of a high level, because there are certain boards and committees that need to get into the detail work, the capital committee and Wilbraham, et cetera. That was our thought.
I think that's an excellent segue. If you look at the slide behind us right now, it says budget process. Our goal was to talk a little bit about our view about budget development under the regulations, because there was a question that was brought forward about what the interim commissioner's guidance to regional districts and their towns was last spring, so we want to get into that. But also we want to have a practical discussion of, so what do we view as the budget process in this upcoming FY27? So this is a starting point for conversation. It's not where it has to end, but we felt like it might be helpful at this time to say, here's what we think we should be thinking about at different points in the year to see if that makes sense to you. If not, we can make adjustments from there. So if I might, I'll turn it over to Doug.
Sure. Thank you. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I've laid out here a timeline, largely by month, of some of our internal process that I'm going to be following, just so I can get a budget together in a way that is meaningful for the school committee, but also you'll notice a few places along the way where we want to engage with the towns, and my hope is that we can be in a synchronous modality as we head into March, when the school committee has to actually vote the numbers. And so, starting this month, literally in probably next week, I'll start putting a template together for the budget document. It's partly a document that I want to change a little bit from past years for the benefit of the school committee, but also for the public at large. And also, compiling the universe of capital needs. So, there are some things we know about. We've put a capital plan together in past years. I want to go back through that in a much more fine-toothed way, because I think there's new things that have gone on it. There's new information we have. And then there's things that have been on there. So structuring that, having some conversation about that. I think surfacing some of the ones that we know are very large ticket items and are also tied to some other processes are part of the things we want to share with you all tonight as well. But we'll put that together and we'll do it sort of internally. So we'll get the a listing of all the stuff. I want to put some more detail for the towns as well as the school committee together, so that when we have conversations about this, we have a little better description of the need and the in some ways the costs and what level of detail of cost we have for some of the more immediate projects versus longer term. As we head into November, we'll get our E&D certified. That'll be a key piece of information as I put the more formal pieces of the budget together. I'll meet with the different administrators across the district, principals, and other district leaders to look at their sections of the budget, make sure that we're putting together for their specific sections the kind of resources they need to do what they do, and to align with our strategic planning and our hopes for what we can do as a school district. So we'll put that together, we'll meet with those folks. At that same time, during the month of November, we'll refine those and rank those capital projects. So we'll go a little more into detail with those capital projects, start to get a little more detail on the most urgent ones, try to refine pricing, try to look at what other funding sources we might explore relative to that. Because some of those things, like I have CPA listed there, community preservation, there's some things that apply. That might be something, and we'll see on a separate slide, that might be able to be used for a bleacher project, might not be. There's some constraints on what you can do with that. But we want to look at that. We want to look at grants, gifts, etc. Look at those sources, try to have that and understand its impact or potentiality relative to our capital projects as we move forward, and do that work, that legwork, that background work, so that we come to you as communities, we can have productive and useful conversations and fit it into the context of the other capital needs you have. And the other thing that would be really helpful, certainly for me, and I think for our school committee as well, is to have conversations with the town, and maybe more with Nick and Barbara and Derek at the town of Wilbraham, and Dick and Brian over in Hampton with regard to what you're seeing and thinking and hearing and understanding about where your financials are for the coming fiscal year. You know, you'll be probably starting your budget process and thinking about what revenues you've got to work with, getting some sense of that, what kind of boundaries we're looking at as far as capacities that you have, what you're thinking about, and starting to frame what our resource might be as a school district as far as what we can potentially have to support our budget. Then as we move into December, you know, I'll go through and refine those estimates and the, you know, those conversations I've had with administrators. We'll do you know, our estimates of staffing, what those costs are going to look like. We're going to do the same sort of thing with capital. We're going to refine those numbers, and again we'll sort of put a frame together of a really preliminary kind of rough budget, see where we're at relative to what we think revenues look like, and that's where, you know, ongoing and continuing conversations with the towns is going to be critical, so that, you know, you're on board and understanding what we're starting to see as far as what our, you know, stressors are in our budget, what are driving our costs, and we're also understanding what yours are as well. Likewise, I'll meet with the Budget and Finance Subcommittee and the school committee to kind of go through this and make sure that the priorities that they have and the things that they are looking at, and, you know, and get their feedback from them relative to sort of putting this together. Because as we get into January, we'll have to bring a first draft to the school committee. Governor's budget comes out mid to late January, so that, you know, that's a big number that'll impact state aid, both for you guys as towns, but also the schools with regard to Chapter 70. They'll make some estimates about what transportation reimbursement looks like and all those things. So we'll be able to refine a little bit. We'll bring the school committee in their late January meeting a first draft of the budget. The more information we have about what you guys have for resources and what you think you can bring to us, both on the capital and on the operating side, is going to be helpful, so that budget looks a lot more like what it'll finally look like. But at the same time, we'll probably still be, in all honesty, probably a little gap relative to, you know, what we'd like to have versus what the resources are. And so we'll make that a public document in a school committee meeting in late January and have that first conversation with the school committee. When we get to February, we'll do a second draft. That'll be a much more refined number. When we're connecting with finance and advisory about, you know, talking through the budget in a more detailed way, you know, will depend to some extent on your schedule and your conversation. We'd love to be earlier than I think we've been in the past. I think having us in there in that between January and February, so that we've got you know, that continuing conversation about what your resources are looking like, would be really helpful for us as far as making sure that we're working toward a common budget that everybody's on board with. And then we get into March, and the school committee has their budget hearing, and they'll vote a budget at that point. Like I said, what I'm hopeful for is that when we're at that point, everybody's kind of on the same page about what the numbers are going to look like, and what the ask is going to be when we go to town meeting in May and ask the voters to take action on it. But I hope that's helpful to sort of lay out the timing of this a little bit. There's a ton of, you know, infrastructure sort of work on the budget in the next couple of months, and I do want to tap into, you know, the towns and what they are seeing for information, what they're hearing, what their expectations are, their comfort levels about whatever it is, whether it be capital resources available or operating budget resources. So I think I'll stop there and see if there's questions or comments.
So sometime right after, I think it was April or May, a letter was sent to myself. It was a DESE letter. It was a summarization of whether or not the school committee has to deal with a budget subcommittee or a finance group or an advisory board. And it basically said that since the school board is an elected official and the school committee is an elected official and the finance committee is appointed, that you guys hold highly totally agree with all that. Everything's good. But it also said that you don't have to work with us. It also said that you can present to town any number that you feel is right. So if we go through this whole budget process, and you get to March, up until about 3 years ago, we all had an agreed upon number. 3 years ago, we started with this area where we were close, but the school committee voted a higher number than what we've agreed to, the two towns, and what we could afford. Mainly Wolverhampton, to be honest, what we could afford. And then it became this last-minute negotiation factor for like the last 3 weeks of the budget process. And I just want to see if we are going to stay with that process, because if that's the process, there's no need for a budget subcommittee. There's no need for anything, because if you're just going to present a number, you're going to present a number. But if we are going to get to a point where we are going back to working collaboratively and working together, that was the ask for this meeting that turned into a capital meeting. But the ask was, what are we doing this year? Are we going to get to a point where we're not surprised and we're not trying to do backroom deals and side meetings, that we're going to get to a point where come March, we're all going to be on the same page?
Just to begin a response to that, I guess what I would say is I understand that the acting commissioner's guidance issued in the spring caused some concern. I'm not exactly sure where the letter came from.
Sure.
I wasn't directed to send anything. Okay, so that was not a communication that was part of a discussion in the school committee. I'm just going to say that. I'll also say that I don't honestly think there's anything the commissioner wrote that was different than my understanding of the law since the beginning of the law for regional schools. And I think what Doug just described is a process of trying to work together with the communities to reach a figure that everyone can live with. All this says is, in the end, the school committee has to put forward the budget that it feels is right, which has always been the case. And I think, you know, nowhere in here does it say you shouldn't collaborate with the towns, you shouldn't try to work together. In the end, the majority of our funding comes from the towns, so, you know, it's in our enlightened best interest to have good relationships with the towns. All it says is the authority rests with the school committee, with nobody else. That's it.
So, and I'm agreeing with everything you said, and even our lawyer says that's the same way we've been working. But 4 years ago, we all knew what was budget appropriate, and everybody, we gave as much as, the towns would give as much as they could. The schools would say, okay, we can, instead of this last minute, okay, fine, we'll take 150 out of our E&D, which, you know, last year caused two weeks of parents panicking and you know, 45 people showing up at the town meeting saying that we're not supporting and little Johnny's not going to have his music teacher anymore and that kind of stuff. So we always worked together, and we always knew that it was going to be painful for the towns, and at times it was going to be painful for the schools. So I just don't want to get to a point where we're pitting each other against each other, pitting the two groups against each other, the town versus the school, and then we do go to the town. Even if we need, even if we need an overlay, we go to the towns together on it. If we need to raise more money, we need to raise taxes, we need to go into our capacity, we need to do whatever we need to do to get the right school budget. But if we agree upon it together and go to the town together versus they won't give it to us.
So I just have a different view, Todd, of the change that I saw. The change I saw was suddenly, it was like a line item veto coming out of FinCom, saying we don't approve of when we were going to have for the ninth graders, we were going to have vocational options for the ninth graders. So that's a good example. And FinCom said, we don't like that, so we're going to give you a budget that is the budget you asked for minus the money that you have down here for that project. And so it was just kind of like, whoa, like, all right, we looked at, or at least I looked at it as like there was like trying this line item veto. And then we would try to compromise, and then we would come to some ending. In the past, I felt it was a lot easier, but things have been getting a lot tighter. And when things get tighter, we have a meeting like this. You understand, I don't know if most of you know, that when we agree on our budget and we vote on our budget and we approve our budget, we still don't know what money we're getting from the state. We get a House budget, we get a Senate budget, we get the governor's budget, and then they sit down and they use whatever alchemy they use over in Boston to come up with the, what do they call it, the reconciled budget? Yeah, you know, and then that's thrown at us in July, August, something like that?
Usually mid-July.
Mid-July, right? And we've already voted and approved in the towns, and we're just crossing our fingers and toes that we guesstimate on how much we're going to get from the towns. So when we from the state, when we talk to you, we are trying our best. We are listening, but so I've been on the finance committee for 10 years, and we've changed how we've done things. What we started to do is that we would meet, and then we would invite the towns in once or twice. Then we decided to have it so that the towns would come, you know, representatives from the towns would come to every meeting. But then we found that we would have conversations and things would be talked about, but it wouldn't necessarily be shared back and forth with the committee. You know, a lot happens when you're meeting, and then, you know, for the 5 or 10 minutes, you know, each meeting that you talk about it, whether it's more or less. I'm just saying that it's not as long as the meeting we had. So, and then what we tried this year, starting at the beginning of this year, is we started going as our finance and operations subcommittee. We would go to the FinCom meetings. We went to an advisory, I think 1 or 2 advisory, and I think we met with Capital 2 or 3 times, twice. And then there was once in the library. We had them once here. Yeah. So and it was funny. It was not funny. It was interesting that when we met with Capital, when we left that last meeting, we were okay. So don't talk about the bleachers. We're going to push off the bleachers, but everything else was good. We thought we had an agreement. And then later, when it came down that we didn't have an agreement, and we were like, but everyone who was sitting at that table from our end, we were like, well, we didn't understand what happened. So I'd like to maybe also if we could talk about like the process, like, you know, when we do agree with something, what's the process that something's agreed, rather than, you know, we walk out of the meeting, half the people said we didn't agree on anything, and then half the people on the other side thought that we had an agreement. So I think that on things like that, you know, process would help clear things up. I do like the idea of the finance and operations with John and Doug going to your meetings so that everyone around the table will have a say and hear what we're saying. I think our meetings at this time at the finance and operations with just one member from each town, I don't think it gives the transparency that I think that the different committees are looking for.
Can I answer this thought? If I could just, last year, Wilbraham was able to raise $1.75 million added funds for the school district. It was $150,000 off. It had nothing to do with vocational training. It was every dollar we could get. Sure. Last year, Wilbraham was able to raise the school budget by $1.75 million. It's the largest increase by about $500,000 that we've given to the school districts for their operational budget. It was short of the need from the schools by $150,000, and it had nothing to do with vocational schools. It had everything to do with we were giving you every dollar we could.
It was the year before that was vocational school.
So I guess I wanted to give my perspective. I have not been on finance and operations as long as Sean, and I think looking at all the experienced people here at the table, I still consider myself a relative newcomer to the scene. You know, when I look at the school budget, I mean, let's face it, part of this is our arms are twisted behind our back because we're getting hit with some pretty serious inflation. I mean, maybe it's electricity one year, maybe it's the cost of retirement another year. And these aren't things that can be ignored, and I find so frustrating that so many of these things, that prices go up and we have like no control over them. My hope and my goal is to be aggressive and cut where, you know, to keep things as tight as possible so that we don't have to make cuts to the school budget. You know, and, you know, the last 3 years, there's been sacrifices every year to get to a number that we really didn't even completely agree on, but eventually there was a number put to town meeting. You know, so, you know, my goal for this year is, you know, hopefully for the assessment is, I don't think we're looking to add major programmatic changes. I don't think we're looking to reinstitute the Latin program, which was always sensitive to me, got cut. And the second that my son Alex got to UMass Amherst, what language did he sign up for? Latin, which really hit my heart. So personally, I'm not looking for that. I know things are really expensive. And it's not just the schools that are expensive, right? The towns are choking on everything else being expensive too. I have a great deal of respect for everybody that's working on the town budgets and keeping the towns and all these things afloat. I didn't intend for this meeting to turn into a capital meeting. I think I can take unfortunate credit for suggesting that we discuss the bleachers. Where that came from wasn't to get everybody to agree that let's do the bleachers right now, but I kind of thought it was going to be, and I was wrong. I thought it was going to be kind of an obvious, of course the bleachers need to be replaced, but not like today. It's a big price tag. Neither town is in the position to put out the capital money for doing the bleachers right now. But I thought it was a great example of an obvious thing, like this is something that needs to be done for the kids. Let's sit down and work together and come up with a plan. And walking back from the field, I heard some talk of like what I was kind of hoping I would hear, which made me happy with people talking about, can we do CPA for this? Can we do this from this? And you know, because a lot of you guys have more experience with the various aspects of town financing than I do. So I kind of thought it would be kind of a test case. You know, it's kind of, you know, basically, the first like really major capital project for the regional district since the building of the high school, which might end up involving, but, my inexperienced perspective on finance is that it probably, maybe if it's going to happen, it's going to be multifactorial funding, right? Some money from capital from each town, some money maybe from some grant program, maybe Doug can work some magic with the state, and maybe some little bit of money needs to be borrowed. Since it's a regional property, then the school committee would have to take the responsibility for borrowing the money if that was the case. As I understand it, and I'm not pretending to be an expert in this stuff, but so I'm sorry, I hope that nobody feels like, like we want to twist someone's arm and we have to do the bleachers this second, but I kind of thought it was like everybody would realize we need to do it for the kids. It's the right thing to do, and that, let's come up with a plan for, how we will work together and make it happen 2 years from now, 3 years from now. It's a big chunk of money, just like a fire truck. When the town knows the fire truck needs to be done, right, what do they start doing? You start squirreling away money in one account or another account, whichever one's the most appropriate for that. And then when it comes time, the money's there. But, like I think 10 or 11 years ago, there was a big push to do something about the bleachers, and it was expensive back then, a fraction of the cost of what it is now, but none of us can go back in time, right? None of us knew how bad inflation was going to hit. None of us knew that we were going to get railed by tariffs and everything else. So, and everything else was going to be expensive too, but we, and also, maybe things with the budget haven't been ideal, but I really want, at least me personally, I want things to go forward positively. And, I don't want to talk a lot about what happened last year and what happened the year before, but I want to come up, I hope we have a good plan for this year. I want, I would hope that everybody would hear what they need to hear, know what's going on, realize that, you know, at least for me, I'm going to push Doug and John. I mean, I want a level budget. I don't want bells and whistles. I don't want extravagances. But I don't want freshman sports to get cut. I don't want the music program to get cut. I don't want to see the kids having major things cut. And maybe nothing can stop that. Maybe we can't afford the level of school district that we have anymore. And that would be a really sad day for me. Because I think myself, like a lot of people in both of our towns, I'm very proud to say that my kids are going in the Hampton-Wilbraham Regional School District. And I think we're one of the best school districts in Massachusetts, maybe in the state. And I'm proud of that. But I know that it's expensive, and I know it's lion's share of the budget for both towns. And I completely respect how much stress that must bring on everyone, especially you guys. I'm just looking at the school budget, and I'm so happy that I was elected to the school committee because I was so stressed out when I was on FinCom looking at the whole rest of the budget and the school budget at the same time. So, all right, I'm going to be quiet now. John.
Thank you, Mike. I want to go back to Sean's point before that it did seem like a little easier back in the past when the school committee would have a group session, basically a little heads up with the boards, maybe in the February timeframe. And again, as Sean said, we still had numbers we didn't know. The House wasn't ready, the Senate wasn't ready, and then the governor would come back with something. But we had a sense of this is what we're looking at for projected increase for Wilbraham and Hampton. I go back to Mike's point that the goal here is to say, maybe your point about not repeating last year, well, it's always good to learn from history. History just showed us it didn't really work that well. How can we make it better so that everybody at the table feels they're invested in it? And a meeting like this does that. We need to keep people informed how it affects every voter, and I see pretty much nothing but voters and taxpayers at these tables. We're doing the right thing, and it hits us in the pocket too. The only question I thought we had in terms of budget coming forward, in terms of mechanics, we had a question about the capital, not the project per se, but capital requests, whether they're in the assessment or not. And I don't think we got a straight or accurate answer at this point. That matters to us because it goes back to the point I think Todd raised. When you give us a number, because you're a regional school district, that's the number that's printed. We may disagree. Maybe we can offer an amendment on the floor which triggers the whole other kettle of fish. But that part is straight. Our opinion has always been that that's separate from capital assessments which follow as other warrant questions. And I think we still have a bit of ambiguity about that.
So I think I can provide a little bit of clarity about that. So for buildings that each of the towns own, those capital projects are like any other capital project in your community. Police car, fire truck, that sort of thing. So those projects that are specific to your buildings, that you as a town own would be capital in the classic sense of every other capital item within your capital planning.
A separate warrant article is what we're saying.
Yeah, yes. For regional capital projects, capital, debt, and operating assessment are all technically combined into a single assessment. And I went back and forth about this because in my previous work, we didn't do cash capital. It was always borrowed money. So there was always a debt authorization and a piece of the budget that was for the debt that was already incurred and that sort of thing. But the totality of the assessment is the combination of those pieces. I think there's, and again, I was just reading the sort of feedback from the lawyers about this. How that is brought to your town meeting can have some variability. So you can consider those pieces separately, I believe. You don't have to consider the assessment as a single. You can consider it as a single item, like it's this much money, here's what's in it, that kind of thing. You can do it as a single question. you can do it as separate pieces depending on how you want to have that conversation about it. But the number for, so if you segregate them, the number is what school committee votes on those regional ones, but I think you're allowed to present those to town meeting as a separate thing. If you want to have your capital discussion as part of the other capital conversation, you can. And of course, if you vote the number that was on those regional assessment pieces, the school committee doesn't have to take any action. If it's different, which is what happened this last spring, then the school committee had to make some action relative to that. There's a whole series of steps and process there. But it is, capital projects are, and capital expenditure are part of the regional assessment to the towns.
Well, I go back to are or can be. Again, typically, our experience in the past has always been, if there was a capital need for a regional facility, it had always been brought forth as a separate warrant article. Now you bring up a good point. We vote the debt for the high school separately. And technically, that's part of the assessment. So it could be one vote, but just as a matter of keeping our debt segregated, we voted separately. It's never been a problem. Are you saying that you have the ability to include capital things as a single assessment letter, knowing that perhaps that capital might trigger an override, which would throw the whole school budget assessment into a problem at that point? And I think it would be prudent for the school committee to consider basically making it the way to go. We will always keep capital for regional structures a separate warrant article. You have the ability to go either way, is what you're saying.
So it is technically part of the assessment. So it is that. How you choose to put it onto the warrant can be distinct. Well, maybe the different reading of it, but it is part of it. It is, the assessment is ultimately a single number, and it is, components are operating debt and capital. How you choose to vote to appropriate for that totality of assessment, it's like your budget. You can choose to vote the entirety of your budget, or you can segment it by debt and capital and operating. So it's the same, I think, distinction there. But I think back to the other question that you raised, which is like, if this number comes forward around capital, that kind of breaks the bank, in a sense, from the standpoint of triggering override, that sort of thing. I think that's where all those conversations I was, in the timeline there that I was hoping we're having in advance, that you're not, that you're prepared for that as an outcome, if that's something, and it would be something that the town, the school committee should be aware of and considering when making those votes around budget. If they're going to, and that's true, really, that's also true for the operating budget too, is, the operating piece of the budget and the operating piece of the assessment, any of those trigger that kind of action necessary in either of the communities. They should be, in my opinion, having really serious conversations with each of the towns, because to do an override is a rather serious endeavor, and so you want to be thoughtful about when you do that and how you do that. So I'm ever hopeful that the process preceding, the school committee vote on a budget would take that into consideration.
Okay, not to monopolize the mic, I know you want to say something. Again, a little experience here, Don as well. The best results have always come with more people at the table. This happening so early in the year is fantastic. I'm not saying we're willing to come to every school committee meeting. Don has volunteered to come to everyone. But I think having this type of meeting, whether it's monthly, every other month or something, and keeping us in the loop so that we can work it into everything has a huge upside to it. So just this start is a welcome thing. And Mike, I know you have more money than we do, so go on.
I don't have more money. So Doug, if I'm understanding correctly, and I think just to play off of what John was asking, effectively what we're talking about is that the operating plus the capital equals the budget. So O plus C equals B, right? So if the select board, okay, fair enough. So the point being that if the select board therefore chooses to bifurcate that operation into 2 separate warrant articles, that seemingly is appropriate. But the bottom line is that if 100% of the assessment letter isn't funded, it's defeated, and therefore the school committee has to respond accordingly, and the rest of the law triggers.
That's correct.
Okay. So I wanted to clarify that because I think for me in part, the way I understood this letter and the way I think I understood our lawyer's interpretation effectively was something along these lines. But that to take exception to your thoughts, Todd, I think it more poignantly says that there's a need for collaboration. Because if we're going to go to town meeting with differing opinions, we at least need to have an understanding and an agreement of basic facts and where we stand on those basic facts to present to the town meeting respectively. So to that end, I think that the way I understood this letter effectively was that each of these bodies has a responsibility that creates a check and a balance to the other responsibility, to the other parties. So that when we go to town meeting, it's not based on emotion and finger pointing, it's instead based in fact and well thought out discussion ahead of that meeting. So thank you.
And I want to echo what Mike just said. The danger I see is that if you contain those 3 things, B, C, and D in one letter, that's your assessment letter. And for whatever reason, a town says, no, we can't fund that capital. In my mind, technically, you've not satisfied the assessment letter. And you trigger what happens when you don't satisfy the assessment letter. And I think you don't want to go there. And so just as a keep things going, you break that capital out separately. Or at least that conversation has happened long before the letter has gone out.
I think there's some nuance here and also just a point I'd like to point out. So one is that, to go back to Doug's first point, it makes a big difference whether you're talking about capital requests for town-owned buildings or capital requests for the region. The way it all sort of boils down is capital request for the region has to be part of the assessment. That's in the regulation. If that fails, technically that fails the budget. If it's just for Green Meadows and that fails, it doesn't matter. It doesn't trigger any of that. Or if it's just one of the Wilbraham-owned buildings, it doesn't trigger that. But when you look at what is supposed to be in the assessment letter, it's the operating budget, it's the capital budget for the district-owned buildings, and it's the debt. So those are the pieces that we have to put in it. And that I don't think there's any way around in the regulation.
John, hypothetically, not that I necessarily think this is the best idea because I know the towns have their own processes, but like, let's say hypothetically, if both towns were having a fall town meeting, and there wasn't a planned assessment letter for operating expenses, could there be an assessment letter just for regional capital? And then if that failed at the fall town meetings, then it wouldn't jeopardize the school budget and wouldn't trigger a 2.5 override and all the nightmares that would ensue after that.
So unfortunately, not really. Because, so in the state's view, the combination of the 3 constitutes the budget. So if you change any one of those, it triggers the need. So like if school committee decides during a fiscal year, oh, we want to change the budget. We want to make it lower or higher or whatever. You can do that, and then you have the same sort of notification process and ability for the towns to then respond to that notification. Now, more often than not, if you change the budget in a way that doesn't affect their assessment, then they usually don't take any action, and then it's fine. So if you had, a windfall of some sort of gift or grant that came through that caused you to want to change the actual budget, you do that. You still send an assessment letter. It would have an unchanged assessment to the towns, but it would talk about the total budget being different. The towns could then take action to approve that, or they wouldn't necessarily have to take action in that circumstance. But if you're changing those, sort of other components of the budget where, it might affect our assessment, and you still have to notify them, and it is a totality. They're interlocked in some respects.
So there's only one assessment per year.
Technically, yes, one for each town.
See, that's the part that bothers me because it doesn't allow you to maintain basically some planning for a level thing. because your capital requirements per year could fluctuate wildly. And you could see your assessment be here, be here, be here, and it provides no planning for a community to do. The part about the towns being responsible for their own buildings, we've always agreed to that. I mean, that's, the only thing you could say is, well, maybe the warrant article for a town building should come from the town, because it's technically their building, but we've seen maybe that should be more in a conversation based on the last couple of years, long before a town meeting, so that we're all in agreement what we want to do with our buildings. But I go back to, if you incorporate that as part of the assessment, you could see such a fluctuation in your assessment there annually, you couldn't plan. You know, you could say, oh, next year, look, the budget request from the school went down 7%. Yes, because you didn't buy any set of bleachers. And I'm just saying. And by the way, my son took Latin. He loved it also.
So what I would say, just to respond to that, and part of this is, you know, I will say that, you know, when laying out a timeline like this, there's some self-interest here. Because it makes my work a lot smoother to go through if we're finding ways to cooperate and get to agreement, because you know, going into situations where budgets aren't approved and doing, you know, 112 budgets and that sort of stuff is a nightmare I don't want to, you know, encounter. But what I will say is that, just to your point about the capital, I think the critical piece, and this is partly for me as you know, providing advice to school committee, but also for the school committee, is to have the discipline around their capital planning to not have that kind of peak and valley, or not as severe. Or if you know that there are those peaks and valleys coming, I mean, there's some unintended circumstances that just happen. You know, mold in a middle school, for example, that might be a major appropriation. But I think the goal with it is to be planful, and you know, things like a 10-year capital plan that has some discipline and some structure to it, and is regularly and equally talked about early in the budgeting for any given year, is pretty critical to avoid those spikes, because it's really challenging. I've worked with other communities, and what's really harder for smaller communities is large change, because, you know, oh, it's only $10,000. Well, to a small budget, that's a huge percentage change. That's really challenging to accommodate. So, you know, my goal as a professional to provide, you know, advice to school committee is to try to modulate that, to try to keep it as steady and as, you know, coherent as we can, and to coordinate with you guys relative to your other capital needs, so that when we have a big ask, somebody else doesn't have a big ask, so we're not all coming to you, you know, the fire department and us, and, you know, police are all coming with gigantic capital requests at the same time. So that's a coordination piece we want to have in place, for sure.
Just to follow along with that, I think that was the rationale for putting the capital pieces in the early part of the budget discussion. You know, unless you have something that's in failure, and honestly, we do have things that are in failure, you have some flexibility around that. So that's where having a discussion about what the town's bills are, what the town's revenues are. Like, if you say, we have a bump this year because we're building a firehouse, but next year it's going to be less, that might be something that we can take into account in planning out when we're going to do the different capital requests. So I did want to sort of get back to the proposed timeline, because we've had a lot of discussion about other things, but not the timeline itself. Does that seem reasonable to everyone? Do you have any suggestions or changes?
Just one comment. First of all, I appreciated the timeline you presented. It was helpful for me. On the line of grants, I would just want to put in the public request at this point for administration and school committee to consider ADA grants through the municipal office on the Massachusetts Office on Disabilities. In my understanding and what I've been able to find as regional properties, that would fall to your control to apply for. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Just a couple of quick things back on process. Oh, and before, the reason I got that letter that I shared with Todd and some other members was because it was always a question whether the number that we gave, that the school committee gives, if that has to go on the warrant. And what we were finding was that FinCom and Wilbraham were putting their own numbers on, and I was just trying to get clarification on that, you know, and at least started this conversation. The two questions I have are, in the case, let's say for a thought experiment that we all around the table agree that the bleachers are not structurally safe. That's just for a thought experiment. What are your thoughts on the Wilbraham Regional School District taking out a loan and doing it that way? Having us go find, do the whole process and award it to somebody and do it and take out a loan, get it bonded and such. What are your thoughts on that? And then I have one more follow-up question.
Speaking only for myself, I think it would be hard for me to speculate on that. I think it's a very contextual conversation about balancing both capital cash available as well as long-term needs. So I think for me to answer that question would have to be posed in a very finite, real sense.
I'll take a stab at it. My understanding is the school committee can vote to incur debt in whatever amount for whatever reason. Required to notify each of the member towns. And if I remember correctly, the select boards of each town have the option of whether or not to call a town meeting or not. If the town meeting is not called, then essentially it's an acceptance of the vote to incur the debt. Obviously, if there is a town meeting called, then there's just a vote at town meeting on whether or not to approve that. That's my recollection of it. That's how we did the fee money for this high school. That was done by way of that type of a debt vote. And it was done in coordination with both select boards, and they did not call town meetings for that. And that was by agreement.
If I may just add something to that.
Turn my phone.
It is on. Push the neck in a little further. It's loose. If I may add something to that, while we may talk about who should incur the debt, it makes no difference to the taxpayer. They're paying the same amount either way. So let's not forget that. I mean, that's a really important element that we just can't skirt over. It makes no difference to them. It's the same amount of money from their wallet, no matter what we do.
I think that's why I kind of made comments, like in my mind, it's like, if we all decide that at some point it's the time to do the bleachers, right? I mean, they're not going to last forever. That money would come from potentially multiple sources to be as responsible as possible, right? Like the towns might not have the cash for the full capital cost, but just like buying a car, 10, 20% down perhaps in the form of capital funds from free cash in the towns, and then ADA grant for another chunk, maybe, if Mike's got us onto something there, and then some bit of the balance, then the school committee would have the option to vote to incur, to bring on debt, which is, I mean, basically we vote to bring on debt, but it's all of our debt, right? So I don't think that doing that in isolation of the school committee is necessarily a very good practice, right? We kind of agreed that, what piece of the pie that should be, if everybody, gets to the point where they're like, yeah, it's time to do the bleachers. Whether it's at 71 years, or 72, 75, 105.
So, and my follow-up question is, so we have Finance and Operations School Committee subcommittee meeting. And we've been doing it that we have your representatives come to those meetings. And then last year we did pivot, and like I said, we went to your meetings. Do you have a preference? Do you find which way works better, where we would have a meeting with your entire committee so that everyone could hear and give input and stuff like that, or do you want to work on the one person coming to the meeting method for transparency?
Give us a minute to discuss it, right?
Yeah.
Come
We have two members on the budget subcommittee that every week is part of our agenda that we can go over, and I would hope that we would get together sometime around mid to end February with some of the state members that come in to kind of give everybody a full overview.
We also have two members that are on the budget subcommittee. I mean, our preference is that we meet, our entire committee meet with the budget subcommittee, but obviously on a limited basis. I mean, that time of year, unfortunately, there tend to be quite a few meetings, and we can't meet just for the sake of meeting. We have to make sure that we actually have something productive.
You think
Todd,
that
can we
around February, Doug, do you think that around February is a good time for that to happen, as William was asking for that?
Unfortunately, the towns are in the same situation as the district in terms of the budget. I mean, we're preparing our budget. We're being asked to submit your assessment, and we don't even know what we're going to be receiving. So, I mean, we're working with all of that uncertainty as well. Generally speaking, the later we push it, the more certain things are, but it's been, I don't know, the last time we had state numbers that were firmed up before our town meeting. I don't remember the last time it happened.
I think it's going to be delayed town meeting to July, isn't it?
So that uncertainty is just inherent in this process. And, that's the legislature and the governor. Obviously, there's nothing we can do about that, except on election day.
Hey, Todd, can you clarify that again? I wasn't quite sure exactly what you meant. Were you saying that you'd like us to meet with your committee and the senators, or?
No, no.
I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah.
No, I like what we do in February, end of February, where we always have a week's written for Dr. Slaughter and Dr. Provost to come in, and then we also have one really at the end of March when we're kind of like really finalizing, and that's when we usually, until the past 3 years, that's when we usually all agree on what the number is going to be that we're all going to agree to. I like that idea. And I like it's still going through the budget subcommittees and that kind of stuff.
Okay, so you like coming to our meetings as opposed to us coming to yours?
I love both.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yep. And I look forward to the meeting.
Can I just ask for clarification? Because I don't know whether I'm just hearing two different things or there are two different opinions within the room. Doug has proposed a series of meetings that would be regular and starting about now and going throughout most of the time to bring us right up to the vote on the budget. But then it seems like, and I've heard people say that that's good. I've also heard people say maybe we shouldn't meet until February. So what's going to work best for the towns?
Am I hearing correctly that we have the Finance Operations Subcommittee meetings on your schedule? However, in February, for both towns, we make a plan to attend a Hamden Advisory meeting and a Wilbraham FinCom meeting where their agenda is to seriously discuss the school budget. And we're there to answer questions, have tomato straw with us.
And in those, and can I ask a follow-up? So I'm seeing nodding heads. Would it be in the meetings prior to that the representatives would come to the budget subcommittee meeting so that we're kind of all on the same page?
Yes, Patrick Keating and myself will do that.
The next thing I wanted to ask, since it's what started it all, I think the answer about whether or not the district intends to continue to collaborate with the district is embedded, or the towns is embedded within the structure of the many meetings that we've laid out. And I also think I just want to say this personally. I was at that meeting, Todd, at the end of the year, where you went line by line through the budget and found all this money for the schools, which has made this district a much better place this year. So thank you for that.
No, thank you.
So do you think you've gotten the answer to your presenting question about whether or not we're still on the same team, essentially?
Yes, I just want to make sure that, yes.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that come March and April that we're working really hard to actually have a number that we all agree on. I don't see where, like last year, we couldn't do.
I think Todd wanted to say go Chog right now.
No. So I don't want the side comments and the emails back and forth, and schools, finance isn't funding the schools, so give them the petitions and give them all the, but we want to make sure that we're all working on the same budget, please.
So, moving on to the next item, I'm glad you ended with Go Chog, and I'm really happy that we had the opportunity to experience that Falcon atmosphere tonight at the outset of the meeting, because the only way to truly feel the spirit of a school community or know how to care for it properly is to experience it directly. We focus a great deal of time and energy on budgets and policies and plans, but these are not the essential thing. The essential thing is the experience of the students, and these are just the means to improve the experience of the students. So we're about to have a discussion about another thing that will have a big impact on what we're able to provide for students. It's a regional agreement. But before we get to that, I'd like to bring some middle school students into the room, at least virtually. So, Aaron, if you'd play the video.
Grand Middle School had an exciting guest and a familiar face in the leadership tag.
22 News reporter Claire Overton explains how their news program has evolved over the past year and shows us which 22 News reporter paid a visit to their set.
It's just fun. It's a new experience. The kids love it. It's actually the best part of my morning.
The Wilbraham Middle School Morning Show is a new addition to the school in the past year, introducing younger generations to broadcast news.
The kids come in, we have script writers, and we do interviews with the superintendent. We've done interviews with police officers about bullying.
Vanderbeek has said the students come in with great ideas and work together as a team.
Meeting with some new friends, some old friends, and seeing people that I don't see every day.
And Tuesday morning, they had a special guest on the show, 22 News reporter and WMS alum, Julia O'Keefe.
They had nothing like this here when I was in middle school, so to get kids interested in journalism and really see how it works when they come to you, I think it's really incredible.
The team of 7th and 8th graders worked to put a newscast together each morning. They had a few questions for 22 News reporter Julia O'Keefe.
What was the most interesting report that you have ever done on the news?
So we have to go to the Biggie, talk about all the cool foods that they had. The governor was there, that's why I interviewed the governor, so it's so hard to get just one every day. It's so different.
Even learning the behind-the-camera roles of a reporter at 22 News.
Do you get a background story before you do the interviews? That's like what I want to know.
We usually get a press release or some information or a website to look at before we go out and shoot those stories. So I think people don't see what happens before, obviously, that story gets on the air. But there's a lot of research that goes into it.
O'Keefe not only getting a chance to go back to school, but also help to educate possibly the next generation of news reporters. Working for you, Claire Overton, 22 News.
So, now that you've seen some of the great things that our students are doing, let me tell you what they're up against. You saw that room, right? That room is the size of the space marked out on the carpet. It's 6 feet wide by 13 feet. When I go in there, I can literally touch both sides of the room at once, just by extending my arms. But they are making it happen. They're going beyond looking for efficiencies. They're bringing resilience, they're bringing innovation to the school every single day. And I feel bad right now as a superintendent because I feel like we're not meeting them. We're working on this regional agreement. We've been working on it for over a year. We've been through so many challenges as two communities and a school committee, and now we're stuck on these two sentences. Actually, it's just the first sentence, which is what to do with the capital costs of the middle school. And so my hope tonight is that, we can show some of the same kind of innovation and resilience and creativity that the students have. If they can turn a 6 by 13 foot room, which by the way used to be the exhaust place where all the sawdust from the shop went. I'm hoping we can find a way to write this last sentence to create an agreement that allows us to keep that building as a viable place for learning for our kids. And so with that, I just wanted to turn it over to those present in the room and say, so what's it going to take to get this done?
Well, you know. The answer is a carve-out. Our main concern is that the heating and air conditioning, and the heating and ventilation system in the middle school, which has been a problem for years, long before we became a unified school. The other option would be just bring it to the town meeting, make that presentation, and, you know, see what the town says. Now, in the past, previously, in the previous, I think back in 2016 or 17, I don't know, you're right, there was a carve out for the roof. So I think we could do the same thing with the middle school for the ventilation system. That's been our position forever. But I suppose if Hamas and Trump can come together, maybe we could. Me being Trump.
Without a question. If I can just ask for clarity, either from Don or the board, the Hammond Select Board. So is it, from what you just said, am I understanding that the singular issue for carve-out is the HVAC system at this point?
Yes, because I think you're trying to move on the doors and windows through the, right? So that'd be the singular most important issue to us. We understand with the demographics and the declining enrollment and all that things that, you know, you need the unified school. The superintendent also needs the flexibility to move students around as he sees it. But our main concern, we had a mold problem last year. I won't bring this up again about who should have paid for that in the beginning. But the ventilation has been a problem for many, many, many years, and everyone's known it, and it needs to be taken care of.
And if I may, I would just turn to my colleagues to see if there's any discussion. I just wanted to ask for clarity on what the specific carve-out request was.
I appreciate hearing that. I've been talking about the air conditioning, the condition of the air in that middle school.
Tim, may I interrupt you for a minute?
Yes.
It's not only important for the, you reminded me of this when you spoke, it's not only important for the students, but you have staff in there, you have a principal in there, you have, custodians and other people who are living and working in there every single day, and that's important to them too.
So what I wanted to say is, I think there's a larger problem here. You know, 3 years ago, before John came in, we had strategic planning meetings in both towns. And I attended those meetings. And I talked about the lack of hands-on learning, shop classes, in the middle school and a reduction in the high school, although there are some opportunities. In this economy, with so many good-paying jobs in the fields of electricity, carpentry, heating and air conditioning, we need to expose our kids to hands-on learning at an early age. There aren't enough seats in the vocational schools that we have an availability to. But there are kids who get out of a vocational school, right out of high school, and end up making more than a first-year teacher if they have learned their skills, and they grow from there, making, I mean, you try to find a plumber these days, you try to find an electrician these days. Those are well-paying jobs, and we're shortchanging our kids, but we don't have the space in that middle school. And I don't expect us to solve that problem tonight or in the near future. But I would like everybody in this room who's in charge of money, who's in charge of their towns, to start getting together and make some long-term, 5-year plans on how we address the problems in the middle school. I spent 25 years teaching in the middle school, and having students in a room that small who probably doesn't have any ventilation, because every space in that building is being utilized. What used to be storage spaces are now offices where teachers are holding meetings with parents and things like that. And there's no room for shop, there is no library there. And believe you me, middle school needs spaces where, you know, sometimes we don't go to our team meeting, we grab a kid who's having trouble, we pull them aside, find a quiet space, sit them down and talk to them during our preparation period, because we know that's going to make a difference for everybody in that child's class for the rest of the day. But you can't do that if there's no space. We are shortchanging our kids by not exposing them to hands-on learning, and there's no room in that building. And I know that's not a problem we can solve tonight. When I heard everybody here saying, yeah, we got to get together, we got to collaborate, I think we need to start looking at this problem and come up with a long-term plan. Because quite frankly, if we don't keep up with surrounding communities, our school system isn't going to be that attractive. And I know 3 years ago when I was running for election and looking over the voting rolls, there are tons and tons of households here that have nothing but 70, 80, and 90-year-old people living in it. And when those houses turn over, if our school system is the top rank that it is right now, they'll fill up with people because they'll want to come here. But if we backslide and keep ignoring this problem, the reputation of the school district is going to go down. So we need a middle school that has a library, that has room for hands-on learning. And our kids deserve nothing less. And I know I'm not going to solve this problem overnight, but I've been talking about it for 2 years now, and I want to see us actually come up with a long-term plan to deal with this. It'll be great for the health and the future of this town if we were to do something like that.
The only other thought I would put out at this time, and I just want to clarify that my intention to turn over to my colleagues was just for the public, was just for discussion. I don't think we're prepared to provide a formal, actionable decision tonight. But I would also kind of, I guess, remind all of us, particularly the two boards, that during the previous rounds of discussions, that there was some framework presented by the Hampton Select Board. Thank you to Mr. Domina and former member Craig Rivest. And I would wonder, speaking for myself only, if it would be worthy of the boards getting back together and in lieu of some of the most recent information that's been shared tonight, along with returning to that framework, to re-engage in this conversation. So, again, speaking for myself.
Our board is meeting Tuesday, I believe, and I'll speak to it then. We'll discuss it then. I think the framework initially envisioned us having a share of the middle school. I don't know. We might be able. We may have moved off that position in order to get the heating and ventilation thing taken care of. So, but we'll meet Monday night and get back to you, so we can move this entire discussion on.
Thank you both. Appreciate that. I know the kids appreciate it. I know the staff appreciates it.
Do we still need to keep the placeholder on for the?
Well, technically that is item D under old business. So I don't know at this moment, but I might know in 45 minutes.
Okay, because we're adjourning at 9. We're adjourning at 9 o'clock.
So to help, I think, provide some context for those continuing conversations, one of the things that was suggested to us as an approach to some of the capital needs, but particularly related to middle school, but other school buildings in Wilbraham, so we'll get to those a little later tonight, but we'll talk about this, the middle school first, was to apply to the MSB Accelerated Repair Program for potential support in getting some capital work done. And so we have done that. We submitted those applications in March. I'll talk a little bit about what we did with the middle school application, which was for windows and doors. And so, the next slide, please. So just to, not that some of you haven't seen this before, but this is just a few photos of the doors that we have. You kind of see the need for the repair. I think, as is sometimes, it's sometimes difficult with photos to see what's what, but these are pretty demonstrative of the need there. Next slide, please. These are the windows. I believe they're original to the building, which is 1968. So they're single pane glass. So their energy efficiency is low. Their functionality is challenging. If something goes wrong with the hardware, it's difficult to get them fixed. So that's part of why we, reached out to the MSBA. If you go to the next slide, please. So the MSBA provides significant support. They came on site to do a little review. We submitted our applications, our statements of interest in March. We got through the sort of first level review. There's some communities that didn't. Now, granted, there were 99 projects submitted, 96 got through, so the bar wasn't too high, I guess. But nonetheless, they came for a site visit. I'll go into some of that detail a little bit later about that. But we posed a couple of questions to them relative to, could we modify the statement of interest? Could we include a heat pump project, which would be an HVAC project to that? And their response was, no, you can't change your statement of interest at that point. And the second thing they said is, we'd have you do the doors and windows first before we'd entertain the project to do your heating ventilation system. So a heat pump, they used to do boiler replacements. They don't do that anymore, but they do heat pump projects. So again, that would fit in nicely with the needs we have for our heating and ventilation needs at that building, at individualized. And a little bit later, we'll talk to the particulars of the things we're doing to keep the system we have functioning and working for us. Let's see if there's anything else I mentioned. Let's go back one. So I think the key thing is there's really two pieces to an MSBA project. There's a feasibility study or schematic design, which is the first step, and then there's the full construction of the project. Those are two funding steps. If we're invited in, the clock starts, and we have to have affirmative authorization for funding for feasibility within 90 days. We have about a year to get full funding for the whole project. And feasibility gets you to a place where you know what the project, estimated costs are. And so that's, again, this is sort of notice. There's a lot of details to be worked out. I'll get into the particulars of MSBA. Their decision process will be at the end of this month. So we'll know whether this project and the other ones are moving forward in about a little less than 3 weeks. So I want to put that into the context of the order of events, and so part of why doors and windows is going to come first is partly because it's an eligible project for MSBA. It's what they would fund before they would do anything related to heating, ventilation, air conditioning in a building. So it's sort of first step in what we need to start addressing the problems around that at the middle school.
And you don't know the cost of it until the feasibility study's done?
The project, yeah, I mean, they have lots of examples on their, of recent projects. It's pricey, but the challenge, especially like with the doors and windows, is, you can look at similar sized buildings, and the challenge is, well, how many windows did that building have versus our building, and that kind of thing. So, but you can get kind of order of magnitude type things. I was looking at projects from fiscal 22 or 2022. Then they took a year off. They did projects in 24. Those projects aren't posted yet because they're still in process. There was a similar-sized door and window project. The building was, well, they had one that was much larger, much larger building, about more than twice the size of ours. It was like $11 million for the doors and windows, but it was a much bigger building. And I don't know if it was a single floor or multiple floors, that kind of thing. In looking at a couple of things, given the size of our middle school, the total project cost is probably going to be in the $6 or $7 million range. But we'll, I think, I would hesitate even writing that down at this point. It's so rough. I think we're going to get a lot better sense of that as we go through and see if we get invited in, first of all. The other thing to keep in mind, and I'll sort of, spill the beans early on this, is we asked them what the MSBA reimbursement for, in this particular case, Wilbraham would be. They told us what the number would be for last year, not the current, which was 57%, which means we're spending 43 cents, they're spending 57 on every dollar that's eligible. Now, not everything's eligible, most things are. Depends on, you have to exert a certain discipline on your project to make sure you stay, on task with the things that are covered. But that makes these, MSBA projects really worth doing, is the amount of reimbursement is significant. And taxpayers have paid into this over the course, anytime you pay sales tax, one of the pennies that you're paying in sales tax is funding this. So we've helped build buildings and put roofs on places all across the Commonwealth, and we should get some of that too, is my opinion, as far as that's concerned. So I just want to give a little context about that door and window project, the fact that it fits into this conversation. It is a first step that needs to get done. If we're going to use MSBA money to do things, it's going to need to be a first step, and I think that it's a pretty powerful impact on that building and its functioning to have better doors and windows.
Doug, just to be clear, on our capital plan, we have $4 million for the doors and windows for WMS, so that sounds like it's a little short. What's the cost of the feasibility study? Do we have any sense?
So that's a little more challenging. I'll say this,
you have 90 days to react to that, is that right?
No, exactly. So I'll tell you a couple of pieces. I looked at some of the projects that were out there, and these are again from 2022. Inflation's done a lot of things in the last couple of years, so it's a little challenging there. Those were in the $80,000, $90,000 range for most of these projects, as far as actual sort of dollars out the door. The folks from MSBA were very, very cautious when they sort of quote these kind of things, said most people are for 2024, so the year previous, this time last year, those folks were budgeting 100 to 150, and they said that's not a recommendation, that's just a statement of what we observe. So I want to keep that in mind. But that's probably the neighborhood. We'll see if we can get a better number there. And again, that's part of that eligible expense as well. So that's part of that total project cost, and those are part of the eligible expenses, and it's a reimbursement. And you have to authorize, in any MSBA project, you have to authorize the whole amount, and then work from there. So those are some of the mechanics of that.
Just some quick math for everybody. If we say it's $7 million to do the windows, 43% would come out to $3,010,000.
And the logistics behind that is we would need to be able to fund the entire amount, is that correct?
Yeah, they require you to have authorization to borrow or spend the total amount.
Yeah, but we wouldn't have to necessarily borrow it because they would be contributing over.
That's correct. They have so they've changed the reimbursement process. You can do a little more, they do a little more pay as you go. So as you get billed, you can charge them. So there's probably some level of maybe short-term borrowing we might need to do just from a cash flow standpoint. And so, that's part of the mechanics of it. And this is one of those things too, where I think the folks at MSBA are going to be good partners with us, and they've got experience with other schools and how, the different ways in which that was approached, and different communities and how they approach that.
So the school does the borrowing on that, or does the town?
In this case, at present, it's still a Wilbraham building, so it would technically be the town.
Okay.
Doug, let me ask a follow-up question, thinking somewhat to the future. So the middle school, as I've understood from conversations at the school committee level, is not adequate space for the number of students. So I think some of the conversation that Wilbraham has had that should be surprising is why invest in a building that we're not sure the future of? I mean, I think that's been a conversation on a number of our buildings potentially. But presumably, and I know there's a lot of ifs and unknowns in here, but if the process was such that we were going to build out the middle school and stay in it, could the HVAC required for the expansion be absorbed into the renovation as part of an MSBA project?
The really quick answer to that is yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can do an ad reno, and so that would be considered renovation. It could be considered, it wouldn't it would probably fall under what they call the core program instead of the accelerated repair, because it would involve the construction of some new space, if that's the direction we wanted to go. The other thing I will share just about MSBA, and I'll reiterate this stuff in a little bit as well, but when you take MSBA money, they have every expectation you're going to continue to use that facility as a school or for school purposes for sort of the useful life of something. So we put a roof on that middle school building not that long ago. And so their expectation is that we'll utilize that space as an educational facility for a roof, 20 to 25 years. 25 is what they're funding, so 25 years or so. If you sell the building, use it for some other purpose, you're welcome to do that. The MSBA is going to essentially kind of reclaim their money in some form or another. If you're doing a different project, then they might discount your other project by that, sort of unutilized, resource that they provided earlier, or again, worst case scenario, they can make you pay it back. But they're looking for you to continue to use the facility that they've invested in as an ongoing educational resource. So that's also a piece to think about, and in looking at a building, and any of our buildings that are of some age, it's kind of like when there's a certain point you get to with the vehicle. It's like, well, do I get a new one, or do I drop another $1,200 on the X that needed to get done this time? Is it going to last long enough? Can I recoup that value, et cetera, et cetera? Some of that kind of trade-offs are part of the conversation. So.
And then for the boards to consider, just thinking out loud here, I think one of the things I would want to keep front and center on any conversation that we have going forward is an 80-20 split on even a 40% reimbursement from the state is less than an 80-20 split on 100% of the cost. So as we're strategizing long-term considerations, I just want to keep that consideration as part of the agreement conversations that we may be having.
Yeah, I was going to. I can definitely skip that section. When we talk about that. So since we're talking about MSBA, you can just skip through those slides. So we kind of beat that horse. All right. Okay. All right. There were probably a couple other finer points about that. So there'll be another day for those. I'll talk about those another time, and everybody else will as well. So go ahead, one more slide, please, if you would. So just to paint the rest of the picture for the MSBA projects we submitted. We submitted 3 projects, partly, at the encouragement of if I remember correctly, of the capital planning committee. These are, so we submitted the middle school building, we submitted Mile Tree for roof replacement, we submitted Stony Hill for roof replacement. Both of those have roofs that meet the 25-year criteria. They're starting to leak, they're starting to be patched regularly. And so we submitted all 3 of those. Like I noted before, the approximate reimbursement rate, the old one was 57, technically 57.11%, but it will change. It will be something other than that. It could go up, could go down. It probably won't change a lot. We haven't had a major shift in our community as far as the metrics that are involved with the calculation of that reimbursement rate. They came to visit us in August on the 20th to do a site visit. They wanted to put eyes on. They essentially had 2 staffers come that do this kind of work all the time and are trained in the field. They went up on the roof of the buildings. It was raining slightly, if I recall correctly. I did not go on the roofs. One of our principals did, who's not a fan of heights, so she was challenging her comfort level a little bit with that. But they looked at, and they asked a ton of questions about, well, what kind of leaks are you experiencing? What kind of problems are you having? Similarly, when we went to the middle school, we quizzed them a little bit about, can we tweak the SOI? Can we ask for this other piece to be added to it? And they were clear in saying, no, they would not, and we would want you to do doors and windows first before we entertain the other one and do that upgrade. So, so that's definitely, where they were at that point and clear about what that was. I think one key date to keep in mind is that on October 29th, just under 3 weeks from tonight, the MSBA board will take votes on projects. So there's 99 accelerated repair projects that were submitted, 96 made it through that first round. So there's 96, they're gonna go yes or no to 96 projects. We could have one project that they say yes to, we have all three say yes to. The indication to us was that if, they've gotten a better source of funding and some constraints have been removed so they have more ability to accept projects than has been the case in the past. And they've gone to an every other year cycle partly because of that, just to manage projects. That's what. So their indication was, barring them making some change to the criteria, which they had no expectation would happen, most of those 96 projects would likely be approved, which puts everybody sort of on the clock to fund them. And so I'm hopeful that, after they meet on the 9th of October, that they'll say yes to our 3 projects. And then the real fun begins as far as, funding it and getting our paperwork in order, because there's a fair amount of legwork that has to happen relative to that. But again, there's 2 phases. You can fund the whole project in one fell swoop if you want to. I don't know that we're sufficiently aware of what it's really going to take for these to do that. The better for us, I think, is to do the feasibility study, schematic design. You see those, and hear those terms kind of interchanged a little bit. That funding first, that's a much more modest amount of money. They go in and do a fairly extensive process of getting basically biddable documents. One of the things they do with roofs is that they are compelled by their regulation and law to evaluate the capacity for solar. And that's one of the things that they report on and are part of the recommendations and requirements there. And then the second phase is the construction. And so you get authorization for construction. You've basically got about a year from when you get authorized to have the funding in place for that. And again, as we said before, you have to authorize the funding for the full amount. And then, hopefully you don't actually have to borrow that full amount just because you'll be getting the reimbursement a little more timely, but you do have to have authorization for all of it upfront. But you have about a year to get that in place. I think that, the feasibility study, like I said, 90 days sort of begs for a fall town meeting for Wilbraham, perhaps, if we get a yes at the end of October. As far as the full project, if timing were perfect, get the feasibility study done and get that work done in pretty short order, and we might be able to come to town meeting with an authorization. But again, there's a whole lot of things that go into that question, because it's going to be a big number. It's going to, do we borrow, do we not borrow, can we do it, do we not? There's a lot of different pieces. Do we have 3 projects, do we have 1? All those things are in the mix. But if we don't do it when we know we're going to have a town meeting in May. So that would be, from a pragmatic standpoint, the easiest. It may not be the best approach to that if we get to that place. What's that? Yeah, so, I looked at, just to give you some sense of the roofs, they're not terribly huge buildings. Montree's a little less than 45,000 square feet. Stony Hill's a little over 36,000 square feet. I think, again, feasibility studies for those, a little smaller project, probably about 100,000 for each of those. There may be an economy of scale if we do multiple projects. We won't know that necessarily going in. Looking at, projects from 22, thinking about the size of those, they have a few more samples to look at relative to that. Stony Hill being a little smaller, probably 4.2 million, maybe 5. Again, I'm estimating a little bit on the high side. I don't know how inflation's impacted those particular industries. Roofing may not have gone up as much as others. So those are pretty broad guesses based on what some projects in recent years have cost, some guess about inflation, trying to be a little conservative with a higher end number. So that's, if you take 7 plus 9, you get 16. That's a pretty good sized number. And that may be part of the conversation too. We just can't do them all. And we may have to say no to MSBA at this point. Those are all conversations we should be having and you'll be needing to have as we go through this. That's assuming you're invited in. So, they may say yes to one project, no to the other 2, or any combination of those. So There's a host of things that might happen, but I wanted to sort of paint the picture of it and what the initial timelines are going to look like, just to see where we are and what steps may be coming. We may, again, they do approvals at the end of October. The first people they invite in is going to be in early November as far as notification. They may stagger it as well, so that could also, just for their own process, be staggering some of these 96 projects. So there's a lot of variability here, and I'm speaking about the sort of earliest timelines on some of this. So I don't want to overstate the immediacy of it. It may play out differently, but just to put it, into the realm of conversation and get started.
I had a question.
Can I just provide this? So this is the first time I'm hearing about it. Maybe I fell asleep at one of our meetings, I don't know. But this is the first time I'm hearing about any of this. Perhaps it would be best to loop us in a little bit earlier than this so that we could begin to talk about potential how we might be able to fund this. I mean, we're talking $15 million. We're even talking probably somewhere between $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 to the feasibility study. So, and we have to make a decision on that very quickly. So, again, I think a little bit more advanced notice on this would be helpful. It's water on the bridge, but
I'm not surprised to hear that. I just have to say, just because I think we've talked about it in public meetings.
Frankly, I don't watch the school committee meetings.
No.
Maybe I missed something.
But we've had conversations with both capital planning and I think with finance in and around this topic and these topics of statements of interest. Now, it may not have been as explicit as this conversation by any stretch. So I'm sorry if you didn't know about it till now. But again, I think that it's been in the realm of conversation. And again, I think it's lesson learned. If it's been a blind spot, I'm sorry. We did not intend to not have you be aware of it, but.
Just a very quick question. You mentioned they give a recommendation on solar. I just wanted to know what that meant. Like, does that mean that if they recommend solar, they'll also pay the percentage of the cost of putting solar panels on the building? And does that mean that the town / school owns the electricity from those, so now they're helping pay our electric bill? If they recommend, then the other thing is if they recommend solar, that does not commit you to need to do it either, hopefully.
So I'll be careful here because I don't know the nitty-gritty on some of this. What I will say is this: I believe that they evaluate whether you have the capacity to put solar on your roof. If you need to make adjustments to your roof to make it solar ready, those are eligible costs that they'll reimburse if you choose to do that. I don't think they compel you to do that, but they certainly, if you're interested, will help you with that. And whether you put solar on later, you can sort of be solar ready, but then not put solar on. Those are all, I think, options available to you, but they do require the evaluation of solar. I don't think they compel you to take action on that. The most they might require is that if you aren't able to tolerate solar, they may request you bolster your roof to be prepared to take solar, but that's the most they would require. But I'm not 100% certain on that. So
if they think you're good for solar, will they also pay 53% of the cost of putting solar on the roof as part of the roof job in this job, or that's like, oh, you can submit an SBA in 5 to 10 years, but it has to get solar panels?
I don't know for sure the answer to that.
I believe I can speak to this a little bit. I'm on the Mass Municipal Association's Policy Committee on Energy and the Environment. We literally had some of these conversations, and there's a gentleman who's on that committee who is part of the Lexington Select Board, and Lexington is building a zero, whatever the word, high school. But anyway, I believe that the funding or support for funding for a solar component would be under a different category. I think that would probably be in green communities. You'd be looking at how you wanted to use the budgeted funds within the green community program. I did want to make one other comment, which is when the school committee at the time, and Doug and I were both on both the feasibility committee for the high school and the building committee, And because the groups were so deeply collaborating through all of that process, particularly the building assessment sort of thing, and the select boards knew that the school committee felt it was the best approach, the school committee voted to borrow for that feasibility study, which I think was about $150. And that we did at the select boards in both towns were notified. I'm sorry. $150,000. And select boards in both towns were notified within the time frame, made the option not to move forward with calling a town meeting because we knew it was happening, and borrowing for that small amount of money was the best way to move the project forward.
Doug, question quickly, particularly on the 90 days, are those calendar days or are those business days? Do you know?
I believe they're calendar dates, but there's also, so the letter is sent and it has like a commitment date. That's when the clock starts. So it's not from October 29th when they vote. There's a little bit of, a couple weeks there.
Which adds a couple of weeks.
There's a fair number of other documents that have to get compiled and put together, so it's a pretty busy 90 days.
No, understood. And so I think it's, and I may be segueing a little bit into the fall town meeting discussion here, but I think that 90 days roughly is January 27th, roughly. If I understand correctly, the timeline to post a special town meeting through the select board process would take about 2 weeks minimum, but if we budget 2 weeks, that puts us around January 13th with a drop dead date to make a decision about how we want to do this if funding comes up. And I say all that in part, and perhaps to segue, if there's no other discussion on this, but to say, depending on the timeline of a regional agreement being finalized, I think there's some consideration that the Wilbraham Select Board will need to take about 1 versus 2 versus a spring discussion on any of the above topics, right? So, and I just say that because, and I don't recall the budget off the top of my head, but we budgeted potentially for a certain amount of special town meetings. And certainly if we schedule one for one purpose and then have another purpose come up, that causes financial issues alone from logistical issues. So I just think that to some extent my position in the following discussion is this is why we have not yet taken action. So.
And I think that segues into another timeline that, for special town meetings, which is what I would foresee as the timeline on regional agreement from the date that we get to mutually agreed upon language. We had negotiations going on between the attorneys for the towns and the school committee on the other components of the agreement. So I think that, that whatever would have to be left to discuss would be small, but I would estimate that we would need at least a couple of weeks from the time that we had language that we were familiar with for all the attorneys to look it over and make any adjustments that they felt, which, hopefully they're not substantive, which would require us to revote. But then after that, it would have to go back to the Department of Education for final legal review by their attorneys before it could go to the commissioner for his blessing to then come back down to towns for a town meeting, which could happen at any time after that. So I guess what I'm saying is, in addition to the 90-day timeline, after you get the commitment letter from the MSBA, you probably have a 1 to 2 month timeline for the regional agreement before that would be ready after we'd reached final language on that.
Is the regional agreement going to be on Hamden's fall town meeting?
We have a placeholder.
Maybe. So maybe.
But it's being signed on Tuesday. But it's being signed on Tuesday, and I believe the regional agreement now states that the school committee has to vote on it and send us a draft saying this is the amendments we propose. And then we bring it to the town meeting.
So it sounds like a tight timeline.
Yeah.
Anything else?
One more question.
It's not on the agenda to talk about, but when you go back to your prospective meetings, if you could, we have an issue at some of the schools with getting people to come in and be lunch monitors and stuff like that. So we're having teachers go and do that. If you could have a discussion, if there's some way that you could allocate that, that working in lieu of taxes, you know, if you guys wouldn't, if you would be so comfortable, if you could talk about it, of opening up the schools to be part of that program, so that maybe some of the volunteers that you're, you know, people who want to work off their taxes could come in and work as lunch monitors. If that's something you could talk, we can't talk about it here, it's not on the agenda, but if it's something you could do, that'd be great. Thank you.
Anything else? All right, well, we thank you so much for being here. You are welcome to adjourn your respective meetings. Second.
All those in favor of adjourning the Wilbraham Select Board? Aye. Thank you. We're adjourned as of 9:49.
And we will also be taking a 5-minute break, so you're welcome to come back.
What's that?
I'm sorry.
there's something to it, guys.
Snacks are popular tonight.
What's the rule, what's the rule for, when we have town meetings? When they say that there's gonna be a town meeting, how much time does that have to be?
Where are they? Oh, thank you.
No. Yeah, I know, last Sunday. Yeah.
She did,
Maybe it's just a give and take. This has been so quick and bad.
well, that's true.
For so long. I think it's not full wins. I don't count the win last year. Right. We lost the first round pick.
I know, and what's his name lost his job because he won. First coach in history to be fired.
He was not a good coach. I think he just like carved out. He's a nice guy.
Yeah. Yes. Very healthy.
Bring your water and fill it up in the hallway.
I'm going to do it too. I can't be the only one not to.
no. And there are different varieties.
So I ordered, I got on the train. So I'm just going to be arriving at 10:40, so I have
We'll be back there. Plenty of time. No. I think
myself, I was thinking, probably, I was wondering if I should do another feed, like, let me check.
I'm just guessing they weren't.
Oh, like, I ordered, we did, on that day, before you drive. It's different when you're there, and then had managers and so on. There was also, they also ordered pizza, I think the extra crown and wine.
All right, everybody. Okay, so it is now time for public comment. Is there anyone here that is interested in making public comment this evening? Okay, thank you so much. We'll move on to the consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Consent agenda?
So moved.
May I have a second? Second. Okay, any questions or discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries 7-0. Thank you. We'll move on to the materials for review. Doug.
Those are not for presentation, just for information.
Perfect, thank you. Well, we do have the need for, our next meeting is Thursday, October 23rd, 6:30 in the IRC. We do have the need for executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, C Chapter 30A, Section 21A, 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with HWEA or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares. HWEA Unit A and C contracts. We will not be returning to regular session. We will be adjourning from executive session. So roll call to move into executive session. Cheryl? Aye. Tim?
Yes.
Sean?
Aye.
Lisa?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Mike?
Yep.
Myself, aye. We're now moved to executive session, 8:59 PM. Thanks, everyone.
Hour after meeting, I'm ready for it.
Oh, that's okay. Take the win.